Good afternoon, folks. Welcome back to Celtic Fans TV. It's time to talk about the managerial situation and all of the rumours that have surfaced this week. I'm delighted to be joined by Martin and Stacy, making our Celtic Fans TV debut. You can ask your questions and get your comments in the live chat box below. We'll try and pick out some good ones as ever as we go through the discussion. Martin, first of all, we've not really had many chances to have whole videos just devoted to talking about the next manager and stuff like that. So today gives us that opportunity. There's been a lot of talk about how the setup is going to look next season and what changes the club have to make. But in your mind, what kind of appointment do you think that Celtic should make in terms of, will it be a head coach or a manager?
So I think they've pretty much made up their mind that it's going to be this director of football role. My personal view on it is it can work. It can work if you get the right personnel and the roles are really, really clear. We've seen it work really badly at some other clubs. A prime example in Scotland would be Hearts, where rumours were that the manager didn't know the team any time before the players did. He was finding out last minute. Sometimes going out the change room and do a team talk and find out the team then. And it got to the point where rumours were that Levine was deciding who the substitutes were going to be. So it can be to that extreme. And Celtic, having passed on in Cham recently, we've seen what happened there with the manager as well. Said wasn't involved in that decision and resigned, offered his resignation with immediate effect. So it can work really, really badly. But if it's done well and the lines of responsibility are clear, then it can work really well. And I'm a fan of it. I think some of that stuff should be taken away from the manager. I think the days of old where the manager picks up the phone and says to a player, I want to sign you, etc. I mean, that comes with a benefit because you feel loved. In the John McGinn situation with us as well, where Celtic wanted to sign John McGinn, but the rumours were that Rodgers didn't make him feel loved. That worked against us because McGinn didn't think the manager wanted him. So there are some benefits to the manager making that phone call. But if it works properly, there's no reason why that can't happen. So your director of football and your scouting team do their job. They engage the manager at the appropriate time and they say, look, we've done all the groundwork, we've identified a player. The manager maybe gives him a list of players that he's remotely interested in, but he doesn't have to do all the associated work. Then they go away and do their work. They'll identify players the manager maybe hasn't, and they have a grown-up conversation about it, and everybody's involved. There's a degree of dialogue. I think that's where it works. Where it doesn't work is it all happens in the background and the manager's totally thrown to the side. But I am a fan of it, and the reason I'm a fan of it is because the managers should be coaching nowadays. The players, they should be involved in training. They should be good man managers and investing all their time on the playing staff, not getting involved in looking at the future and other players. But to an degree, they need to be engaged. They need to be aware of who the scout's looking at, who the director of football is looking at, and let the director of football take care of the financial side of it as well. Take that away from the chief exec and let them agree terms, wages, contracts, clauses, all that sort of stuff. The director of football is, and a lot of managers shouldn't be involved in that stuff, and neither should the chief exec. So I think the director of football is the way to go, but I think it's only if you bring in the right person who makes sure that the manager's engaged, and we're not bringing in players that the manager doesn't want, because that's where it becomes an absolute disaster. He's putting them on the bench because the director of football brings them in, the manager puts them on the bench, and it just falls apart. But I think that's the way the club are looking to go. It has been successful in Europe. Obviously, some of the English teams have looked at that structure as well, and I don't see why it can't work. It's almost like somebody underneath the chief exec. It's another part of your management team, if you like, that allows the coach to invest more time in the things that are important and not just doing the pre-match team talk, because that management piece is so important nowadays.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's so much going on at football clubs nowadays, so many staff, so many different departments, that the idea that a manager can sort of oversee it all and still put all of his time into coaching the team, I think that's long gone. I think that's why we have to move to this sort of structure. Stacy, I'll put the same question to you. What kind of appointment do you think that Celtic should be looking to make?
It's a tough one for me because obviously the way the season's gone, it's, to me, when they appointed Lennon, that was just destined to fall, because the first time round they obviously had great success, but this time round obviously it did go well for the first part of the season. We won obviously the trophies and stuff like that, the treble and all of that, but director of football is probably the way to go, because it, like Martin said, it takes the pressure off. if there's going to be a manager that comes in, and it has to be a manager that the players are going to have to get behind, because you've seen Lennon throwing players under the bus and of the post-match analysis and stuff like that, and obviously it doesn't really do the club any favours. It puts on a bad picture, the club, for me personally. So I think the director of football will come in, like Martin says, and it will take the pressure off, I think, for most part. But I think they really need to start engaging with the fans and telling. Obviously, there's a process with Dermot Desmond saying, with coming his interviews, saying that they're obviously started to interview people, but it needs to be soon, because we need to start preparing for next season now, because we're coming up close to the end of the season now. Pretty much everything's gone. All we've got is the Scottish Cup now, which obviously is a major thing now for a season with it went. So I really do think that they've got to bring in someone pretty much straight away, and they've obviously identified that they're bringing in a director of football, but that's kind of went underneath the radar in the last week or so. No one's really mentioned director of football, and all it's been about is Roy Keane possibly coming in as manager, but director of football obviously will really benefit the club, but like I said, it needs to be done sharpish, because the longer they leave it, it's going to not look good in the sense of the club, like reputation and stuff like that, because we need to start rebuilding now, obviously with the season being done. So it really needs to pretty much be done soon, because we need to start rebuilding for next season, which is obviously pretty serious now. So I really do think it needs to be done quick, because I don't think the longer they leave it, it looks bad on the club. So
Yeah.
director of football, I think there's obviously been a lot of speculation on who would come in as director of football, but obviously everybody's got different preferences. But obviously our relationship with Manchester City, you can see that there's a good relationship going with the amount of players we've brought on, like Paddy Roberts and stuff like that. So I do think Fergal McCann would probably be my appointment, but it really is down to who really wants it, because obviously it's going to be challenging to see who really wants to be part of the club. But I don't see why they wouldn't want to come, because we are one of the biggest clubs in the world, and it's a great experience to come and try develop players. And obviously European football is the big tournament that everyone needs to be involved in, and whereas the director of football will obviously identify like certain parts of the recruitment and stuff like that, and obviously it is key, because it's a new direction, and that's what we need. Like you're saying, there's a big overhaul coming, and it needs to happen soon, I think.
Yeah, I think there's actually been a lot of discussion around directors of football, but a couple of people have asked me this week, Martin, why do we think that we're guaranteed to get a director of football? No one from the club has confirmed that. Of course they haven't, but there's been enough talk in the media and from the usual reliable sources who we know have close links to Celtic, that is the route that we're looking to go down. Obviously, the talk this week has all been about Roy Keane for the most part. Now, thinking about a director of football, Roy Keane strikes me as a manager and not a head coach. If you have a director of football, you're thinking more about a head coach than a manager. I think it's fair to say the majority of us don't like the idea of appointing Roy Keane. Can you understand that?
I can. Just last thing on the director of football, I think it's a bit of a moot point, because what it does is it formalises a structure, right? But if you say you're not going to have a director of football, there's still roles and responsibilities. So if you look at last year, so how much say did Neil Lennon get in appointments, and how much say did Peter Lawwell and his peer group, the board? So who had the say? Do any of us know? Did Neil Lennon have 80% and the board had 20%? They had to ratify it. Who made the phone calls? Who spoke to who negotiated contracts? So I think the director of football almost feels like an extension of the board. That's all it is. It's nothing more than that, because in the absence of a director of football, there is still a group of board members who will make a decision on recruitment ultimately. Neil Lennon's not deciding whether we spend 100 million or 10 million. He's not deciding how much a player's getting paid weekly, etc., etc., etc. So I think the director of football bit, for me, there'd be some benefit to that, but it could go wrong if we're appointing the wrong people. If it doesn't happen, I won't lose any sleep, because in the absence of director of football, the board will do what they do, which is essentially the work that a director of football will do. So I am not bothered either way. The Roy Keane appointment, whether there's a director of football or not, Roy Keane will fall out with everybody round about, and whether that be Peter Lowell if he's going to go, whether it be the new guy who comes in, whether it be a director of football, whether it be a chief executive, it doesn't matter what the title is, he'll fall out with everybody, and we know that. He fell out with Alex Ferguson, he fell out with Mick McCarthy, he fell out with the Man United fans, he said that we should stop eating prawn sandwiches and start supporting the team. He falls out with everybody, Graham Souness and the likes on the TV every weekend. He fell out with Patrick Vieira. He just falls out with everybody. It's just him, isn't it? He's like an Irish Chris Sutton. He could have been Jim Carrey in the film Liar Liar, because he just says it. He's no emotional intelligence whatsoever. He just says what he feels, and he's a bulldozer. Now, the benefit for us would be we'd come in, we'd sort out the dressing room, but he'd fall out with a lot of people, and only a certain type of player would play for him. That type of manager in the modern game is quite uncommon. And in actual fact, you look at Mourinho now. Mourinho obviously was a sensational manager in the early days, but he's struggling now, isn't he? Because it's all about him. And Roy Keane's a bit like that as well. It's all about him. The world revolves around him, and what he says is right. He's no time for anybody else's opinion. I actually think he disagrees with people just for the sake of it, the way that Chris Sutton does. And Mourinho's a bit like that now as well. He's struggled at Man United, he's struggled at Tottenham, he's got a ridiculous amount of resource in his head. And I think Keane would be a big risk. Managerial wise, he hasn't had a successful. He's been an assistant for most of the time, but as a standalone manager at Ipswich and Sunderland, his win rate wasn't good. It wasn't a successful period, and even as an assistant manager to Martin O'Neill and Paul Lambert, his record wasn't great either. So Roy Keane's an interesting one, because a Celtic man, when we signed him as a player, the excitement was incredible, albeit I think he only played something like 10 games, but as a manager, that would be a very, very bold appointment, and I think there'd be a lot of fans excited by it, but I think there'd be far more fans not pleased about it. Whilst he's got experience in Europe as a player, his experience as a manager is nowhere near where we want it to be. Sadly, Celtic throughout their history, Paul, have signed far too many managers who have no experience at managerial level, or they've got very little experience. So I wouldn't be shocked by that appointment. I think that's what Celtic have done throughout their history. Looking at some stats just before we came on. So 18 managers we've had in our history. 5 of those, Celtic's been their first managerial appointment. 5 of them have only managed in Scotland, so no experience out with Scotland and some smaller teams in Celtic. One of them being a rookie manager, which is Delia. He'd only managed that team we've never heard of. And therefore that only leaves you 3 that had managed smaller teams in England, McCarry, Mowbray and Strachan. 2 that had experience in European leagues, such as Janssen and Weghorst. And then we only really had big appointments, which is O'Neill and Rodgers, throughout our whole history, which is astounding when you think about it. 130 plus years. We've only had 2 appointments that have really excited the fans. And we do want an O'Neill and we do want a Rodgers, but I realistically think we're going to get them. So when I heard the Roy Keane thing, I thought, here we go again. 11 of the 18 appointments that we've had have been ex-players, and 2 of them have been fans, which is O'Neill and Rodgers. There's only been 5 that we've signed in our entire history that have got no association to Celtic whatsoever. And out of those 5, if I name them, they're not huge names. So Janssen had a wee bit of time at Feyenoord, but he left Feyenoord and he was on the way down. He wasn't on the way up. So we were good for Janssen rather than being the other way around. Weghorst was just topping up his pension. Barnes was obviously an absolute disaster. Strachan had failed at Coventry and done okay at Southampton, but again we were as much for him as he was for us. And then Delia. That's the 5 appointments we've made in 130 plus years that have had no affiliation to Celtic. So that shows you, the lack of ambition that we've had throughout our history on bringing in a big name, somebody who's got experience at managing at a high level, managing a team in the Premier League in England, managing a team in Europe in one of the top 5 leagues. We've not done it in the past. That's when I heard Roy Keane's name, I thought, here we go again. Celtic fan, ex-Celtic player, rookie manager. And then, as you say, Paul, the big contentious part would be his personality and how much disruption he would cause. And would he hang about? If things started to go against him, whether it be director of football, whether it be chief executive, whether it be the players not playing for him, how long would it take him to go walking his dog like he did with Ireland team? I mean, if you leave the World Cup, how can you handle the pressure in Scotland?
Yeah, I think for me, the thing about Roy Keane is that there's so many things. Obviously, he's not had a managerial position for a decade now. He has been assistant to Martin O'Neill and shortly with Paul Lambert at Aston Villa. But the thing for me is obviously his personality. You can tell. I know that it's maybe put on a little bit as a pundit, and I love him as a pundit. I love listening to him. But you'd never get great tactical insight from him. He's always talking about getting closer to people, tackling harder, not letting people run past you. You don't get a great deal of tactical insight from him. And okay, some people might think he'd be the ideal man to come in and whip the dressing room into shape and take care of the prima donnas and all this sort of stuff. But the issue would be if things started to go wrong, he would lose the dressing room immediately, because there's plenty of stories from other clubs. Ipswich with John Walters, and I think a situation at Ireland with Harry Arter as well, where he's almost coming to blows with him. He's almost fighting with him, and that's, you just can't have that. And football's evolved past that sort of carrot and stick motivation by intimidation. It's just, we're so far by that now, and I just, none of the problems that we have, Keane is qualified to fix. That's my opinion on it. Stacy, what do you think?
I'm just really annoyed by it, to be honest. I just don't see, like you're saying, all of these points you have made, that he's going to make that dressing room any better, because to me it would just make it worse. Because obviously with the rebuild, we're going to have a lot of turnover of players. Obviously with Scott Brown, obviously, which is another big issue. Obviously going to Aberdeen. So obviously there's going to be a big captaincy role going as well. Who would he choose as captain, or would the club make a decision? And obviously you've got all your loan players going back, like Shane Duffy, El Yunusi, all these kind of players, and then obviously like Ayer and Edouard, all these big names obviously going to be possibly leaving in the summer as well. And I just don't see how, obviously with the managerial, he's only like you're saying, managed for a decade. It just wouldn't seem the right appointment for Celtic. So obviously we're going to be competing for trophies, European spots, etc. And I just don't see how he would motivate players to win games and stuff, and he doesn't really know tactics, obviously, because he's not really been a manager. So I just, like, obviously like what Martin's saying about, like, obviously the amount of managers we've obviously had over the years, and the amount of, like, obviously it's been close to the club and it's out with that. So it just wouldn't seem the right appointment for me. You need someone that's obviously got a lot more managerial experience, who knows how to set up a team properly with structure and tactics. And with Brendan Rodgers, obviously Rodgers wasn't the best in Europe, but he knew how to change games. For example, obviously that 3-2 at Rangers, obviously we were down, and then he brings off a defender, I think he brought off or something, and then put on Edouard, and he wins us the game. So I just don't see how he would bring these sort of tactics to Celtic that would win his games. And like you're saying, it takes that one major slip up in how would he motivate players to get back in and concentrate and stuff like that. So I just don't see how he would be a great appointment. Obviously others would disagree, which is totally, it's an opinion obviously at the end of the day, but for me I just don't see how he would change the team into a winning team again. So obviously like you're saying, he would come in and sort the players out for a period of time, but how long would that period last? It's alright if you're winning, but when you're losing, that's when obviously we come in for criticism, because you don't know if it would make it worse, and then would the players follow with them, so to me it just isn't the appointment, but that's for others to decide. But to me it just isn't the right appointment. I think there's more out there with more experience that would be beneficial to Celtic.
Yeah, I think the big thing is that through all of this season, we've been saying that we need a manager of the highest caliber, or a head coach, if we do get director of football, and that it needs to be a big appointment. It needs to be someone who has clout as a manager, and Keane is a big name in football, obviously. His playing career is up there with some of the best midfielders in the last 20, 30, 40 years. But I think as a manager, he's just not cut out to come in and do the job we need him to do this summer. I want to bring in a question. Planet Celtic is saying, what do you think the new manager's expectations should be? We can't win the treble every season. Martin, that's an interesting one, isn't it? Because we know there's going to be a lot of turmoil in the summer. a new chief executive, potentially a director of football, a new manager, and a lot of player turnover as well, with loan players going back to their parent clubs, guys' contracts running down, Edward, Ayer, Christie, as Stacy mentioned. What do you think the expectations are going to be, and do you think we can be more patient? Ultimately, we're going to have to win the title.
Yeah. I mean, we faltered in Europe in the last few years, so that's not likely to be something that will turn around quickly. So we maybe need to be a bit patient in Europe. But in the trebles are not likely to come back anytime soon either. But I think that the bread and butter league has to be the priority for the season coming up. To win the league, there's a big incentive we're getting into the Champions League straight in. So we'll have to put our heart and soul into that. And I know we said that last year, that the 10 in a row was ultimately all that mattered. It's the same again as winning the league and taking that title back off Rangers, because should they win 2 in a row, they'll just gather momentum and it could become tougher for us to. It's all the financial benefit that comes with that, Champions League being the obvious ingredient, but there's other stuff as well, isn't there? So winning the league's got to be the number one priority, and it is going to be tough because we're hoping that we'll hold on to some of the better players, but there will be a mass clear out. Maybe that's not a bad thing though. We just cannot afford for it to take us several years to. When you listen to Solskjaer at Man United, he's talking about being work in progress, and at Celtic it needs to be almost immediate. We need to hit the ground running, and it shouldn't be that difficult to do. I know Gerrard had a good year this year, but we didn't put him under any pressure whatsoever. And I think if we had, it might have been a slightly different outcome. But we'll never know now. We can't rewind the clock. But certainly in the previous years, the bottle went a few times. So I don't think they're as far ahead as we fear. And I think the clear out's a good thing rather than a bad thing. Yes, we'll be sad to see some of the players go, but only 2 or 3 of them will be sad to see go. Most of the rest of them will be quite happy to get them off the wage bill. But it's important to get the right manager in that's going to be able to inspire those guys from the word go, and it'll be interesting to see what sort of budget's available to bring in some big names. But yeah, to answer the question, it absolutely has to be winning the league. We'll have to throw everything into that, and if that's all we win, it's success in my mind. The cups can go to other teams, and let's get that league back as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I think that's obviously the main priority for us. Just bringing in a comment here for Sean. Win the league, nothing else. We can't afford Rangers getting into the Champions League 2 seasons in a row and us not. And Stacey, that's obviously the big carrot at the end of next season, where the winners of the title could go straight into the Champions League group stages. And we know there's going to be a rebuild and we might have to be patient, but ultimately we can't afford to lose out on that Champions League spot. Yeah,
that's the priority. Getting the league back as quickly as possible. Obviously, with the way this season's gone, it's the utmost priority. Like you're saying, with the rebuild coming in. And that's another issue, season ticket renewals. So, obviously, with the new manager coming in, obviously, you've got a waiting list as well. But as fans, do we really want to see that a manager who has 10 years experience come in, hopefully wins the league, and then obviously challenge to get, Champions League, obviously. But will we really want to renew our season tickets if an unexperienced manager is going to come in and try lead us to win the league? I really don't think so. So it is the priority to bring in, whether it be a head coach or a manager, the league is the utmost priority because it gets us back into the Champions League, which obviously is the main goal, because we've had success for nearly 9 years now, and this has been the one big blip that we've had in recent times. So it needs to be right, and it needs to be right for the club and the fans, because the fans have suffered the most throughout this, not getting to games and seeing our club, obviously, because obviously they're obviously letting that say that's been a big issue, not having fans in stadiums, which I can get, because as a season ticket holder or non-season ticket holder, all you want to be is cheer your team on, and obviously this season's not going the way it's supposed to. So winning the league, getting the league back is the main priority, because it obviously, like Martin's saying, it doesn't matter about cups. Well, obviously it does, but at the same time, the league gets us back to European football, which obviously will be good for the fans if we do, obviously after COVID, get to go back and watch. So obviously it'll be good to get back under lights at Celtic Park and hopefully cheer a team on, and hopefully, but like I said, the league is the priority.
That's a huge issue for us. Coming back to who's appointed in terms of season ticket sales. I think the club will be aware of that. I think that's why we probably got that wee bit of an interview, if you want to call it that, from Dermot Desmond during the week, just to remind us that they are working on it and to communicate with us in some way, despite the fact that it didn't answer a great deal of questions for us. Martin, last night, Eddie Howe rumours. We thought the Roy Keane rumours were bad this week, but last night, Eddie Howe was supposed to be in the Radisson or in just about every hotel in Glasgow. These rumours just grow arms and legs, and there's probably absolutely nothing to them. But Eddie Howe, for me, is probably my number one pick. And I know a lot of people think he doesn't maybe have the requisite experience to manage Celtic because he's only managed Bournemouth and they're such a small club. But for me, he made them overachieve for the best part of 5 years. He took them into the Premier League and he played a style of football I think that was very attractive. And as I said, they punched above their weight, and he's got a track record of performing against teams who Bournemouth shouldn't be competing against. And I think that's important, that we have a manager who tactically, he seems astute, he talks really well. And as I say, he's got experience of competing at the highest level. Okay, Bournemouth are a small club, but I think he's got everything that we would need for a new head coach.
Yeah. I don't know how much anybody who's watching will know about Eddie, how much research I've done, but I learned a few things just reading up on him recently. I'm just going to quickly run through those, Paul, if that's all right. But first thing to call it, he's a defender, and our defence hasn't been very good, so he might be able to help us defensively. Football League Manager of the Decade in 2015. You know, that's a nice thing having your CV, isn't it? I didn't know that, and I was really impressed when I read that. Bournemouth faced relegation to conference in January 2009, so they were going to be out. You know, the football leagues altogether down in the conference. And at that time, he was the youngest manager in football league. So we went into that as a real youngster with no managerial experience, youngest manager, and avoided relegation in that first year. And they started off 17 points, minus 17 points at the start of the year, and avoided relegation. So that in itself was a great achievement. And then promoted the next again year, so immediately gained promotion, and then 2 further promotions in 3 years. We built them up through the leagues, and then once they got in that top league, stayed there for 5 years. So bearing in mind that they come up from the very, very bottom, to stay in that top league for 5 years was a sensational achievement. And then he was the longest serving manager in the league as well at that time. And then he himself resigned when they got relegated, felt accountable and resigned, which again tells you a lot about the type of person he is. I've spoken about John Kennedy being a good speaker and been shot down with a couple of comments on the programme for saying that. So it's not all about being able to talk, but communication is important. In any job that you do in any life, any walk of life, whether it be a relationship, whether it be you're a director, a player, whatever, being able to communicate is important. And he does carry himself well. He comes across as really calm. He never gets wound up with press conferences. So I think he'd be able to handle the pressure comfortably in Scotland. Some might say, you know, he's not won trophies, but you could argue that he's obviously won leagues, hasn't he? So, whilst he's not won out and won cups, etc., he's won leagues, so he's had to fight. And what that's done, because in Scotland you have to win most of your games. So when he's worked his way through the leagues, they've been winning most of their games, albeit that wouldn't have been the case in the Premier League. He might also be somebody who would stay with us for a prolonged period of time, which we all get frustrated when somebody comes in and they disappear. Brendan Rodgers being the obvious recent example of that, where the fans were cracking up. Why has he not got a Celtic tattoo and stayed with us for life? Well, sadly, a lot of people just see Celtic as a stepping stone, and off he went to Leicester. And he would argue he's made the right decision for a number of reasons. But Eddie Howe has stayed with Bournemouth as a player and as a manager for most of his life. And Bournemouth wouldn't have been able to offer him, sensational terms, etc. So he's just shown a commitment. He's gone in there and he's embraced the opportunity and shown dedication to that club. So I would hope and expect that he would do the same at Celtic. Maybe not. Maybe salary, etc. would make him move on. But I think we'd get him for a reasonable period. I suppose the downside is no experience in Europe as a player or as a manager. But that's not important to us right now. We all like those glory European nights. But I think if he comes in and he brings the right personnel, he attracts some players, and I'm sure he will because he's got a good reputation. He doesn't demand too much money. He gets on everybody round about him, and he creates some harmony in the club. I don't think it'll be very long before we'll start to see some glory European nights back at Celtic Park. Not winning the Champions League, but getting into the Champions League, and if we're in Europa, getting out the group stage and getting into the last 16 quarter-final type thing, I'm sure he could deliver that for us. And that'll be an attraction for him. But I think I said to you during the week, Paul, it's only an attraction to managers if they think that we're not going to get hammered. I mean, even Rodgers was getting absolutely scalped in Europe. So the lure of Champions League and European football to Celtic is only of benefit to manager if they think they're going to be able to compete. And that's where it comes into budget conversations. And that's why a lot of the big guys aren't interested, because it will ruin their reputation rather than enhance their reputation. Because no point putting your CV, I managed a team in Europe, if you didn't win any games. So it's every piece of the jigsaw. I would like to see Eddie Howe come in. I didn't realise his full credentials until I did a bit of research on him. But as I said, that Football League Manager of the Decade in 2015, it sounds like it was really well deserved. And he seems like a genuinely nice guy. He'll get the best out of the players. He'll work well with a director of football or a chief executive, board members, fans. Very, very engaging guy. So I think most of the fans will be happy with the Eddie Howe employment. A lot of stuff I've seen on social media appears to be suggesting that he's the fans' favourite.
I think so. I think he's a good fit for us, and we're a good fit for him. I think, as you say, he doesn't have a record of winning major trophies. He's won the League One, League Two, the Championship. But I think he could come here and he could develop as a coach and as a manager as well. And also it's a good fit for us because, let's face it, we're not going to attract a manager who has seen it all, done it all, won all the major honours, has got 20 years experience. It's just not going to happen. So I want to bring up this question from Monty saying, why is Howe out of work if he's so good? Well, a lot of managers have spells out of work, and I think he's obviously left Bournemouth. At the end of the day, they didn't want to get relegated. He's left. It's obviously been a COVID year. I think he wanted to take some time out and learn and travel, which he's not obviously been able to do. I don't think if Crystal Palace, Newcastle, Southampton sacked their manager that Eddie Howe would be far away from the top of their list. So I think he's in demand. It might transpire that he ends up waiting till the summer to see if he can get a job in the Premier League, and it absolutely wouldn't surprise me if he did. But I don't think the fact that he's out of work at the minute is reflective at all in terms of how good a coach he is. Stacey, yeah.
Paul, sorry to interrupt. Just very, very quickly in response to that comment. I mean, it's a valid question, but Brendan Rodgers was out of work, wasn't he? When we got him, you could run your way through all the big Celtic managers. I don't know that we've signed that many. You could also look at the guys in England. Marino was out of work, was he not? So a lot of managers will be out of work. How many managers do you steal off a club, and how many do you get because they're temporarily considering their options and they're taking a couple of months to look at what's available? So it's quite common to appoint somebody who's currently out of work, not to steal somebody from another club. And Rodgers being a prime example for us. Sorry, Steve.
Yep. Stacey, just want to get your thoughts on Eddie Howe quickly.
Well, I've not really hidden the fact, especially on like Twitter and stuff, social media, that Eddie Howe would be my number one choice. I've said it since day one. I just think, like, what points you've pretty much summed up everything that you were saying. Just because he hasn't won major trophies down in England doesn't mean to say he can't do it up here. Because, like you're saying, all it is about winning trophies and getting into Europe. So he seems like like you're saying, Martin, like a very humble guy. He just seems to know what type of football he wants to play and how he plays it, and he always implements it. Especially coming from Bournemouth, obviously. Bournemouth, like you're saying, is a small club, but the way he's obviously got them up to where they were for like you're saying, Martin, for 5 years, just shows the respect he's got at the club, the respect as a manager. So, and I really do think he would get the respect of the whole entire, obviously, club, fans, etc. So, I just don't think you should just obviously say because he hasn't won major trophies doesn't make you say he wouldn't be a good manager, because you don't know that until he actually comes into the club, whether it be a head coach or a manager. But he's always been my number one. I just think the style of football he plays, it's obviously is quite attacking football, which is obviously what Celtic play. It isn't really defensive. Obviously, bear in mind, obviously when Rodgers came, he obviously set up Celtic very well and stuff. But I just think he's got that kind of demeanour that says that he's willing to be there as long as possible, because he's been with Bournemouth such a long time now. Well, he was with Bournemouth such a long time that he built up a great reputation. And like you're saying, he left on his own terms when obviously they got relegated. So maybe he just wanted time out. We just don't know. But I just think he would be a great appointment. And I do think, obviously, with the rebuild and stuff, etc., we don't know how it would work straight away. But you've got to give a new manager or head coach time to implement his ideas, structure, etc. Like you're saying, he seems like a very well humble guy, especially like in post-match analysis and stuff like that. So I think his credentials, just because hasn't won major trophies, doesn't mean say he couldn't do it in Scottish football. Just look at like obviously go on the other side, Steven Gerrard. This was his first major appointment, and obviously he hasn't won it in 3 years, but he's got it in the end. So it just shows you need time and a club that believes in you to implement the players, because obviously having an input in the players you want is a big thing. Because like you've seen with the John McGinn saga, Brendan Rodgers wanted him, and then we stuffed it up, and then look how great he's doing at Aston Villa and stuff like that. So if he's given the time and effort, I really do think it'd be a great appointment, having the kind of players and set up the way the team goes. Then it obviously time will tell, because we still need to see what other shortlisted candidates that Dermot Desmond and obviously the board are looking at. But I do think he would be the right choice, in my opinion. There is obviously others that have been linked that I can see in the description below, obviously like Chris Wilder, Maresca and stuff like that, but I do think he's probably the number one choice out of all of them just now. But like you're saying, we need time, because we don't even have a director of football or anything like that yet, but he would be my number one choice.
Yeah, I think obviously the director of football, most people think that will come first. I think it has to, if we are going to change the structure to that setup. The odds, the current odds are running along the bottom of the screen. I know they've been absolutely nothing. The last bit on Eddie Howe, Ian McIntosh commented there to say that he was touted for the Arsenal and England jobs not too long ago, and that's how football works. When he was at the peak of his powers, if you like, at Bournemouth, I think they finished 9th. That was their highest finish in the Premier League. He was being talked about for the Arsenal job, and he was linked with the England job. I think he is a high caliber manager, and I think he'll go on to show that if his next appointment is Celtic or not. If he does end up with a job in the Premier League, I'm confident that he'll show he's a good manager, and that's why I think he should be our number one choice. Martin, the last candidate I want to talk about tonight is another name that won't go away. It's obviously closely linked to the Fergal Harkin director of football rumours, and it's Enzo Maresca from Manchester City. The under-23s coach. He's worked at Sevilla and at West Ham. Obviously never held a first-team managerial role. He's young in his coaching career. Do you think that would be a risk in terms of the pressure and the attention involved with being a Celtic manager? Yeah,
he wouldn't be my choice. I would much rather went with somebody with managerial experience, so the right personality fit and some managerial experience. I was talking about earlier on, Paul, that a number of times that we've given somebody a chance and it's been their first senior managerial job, or they've managed smaller clubs, it hasn't worked. And I'm not a big fan. I know Stacy talked about Steven Gerrard, but Steven Gerrard's not done well in the domestic cups at all. He's actually massively underperformed in that space, and this year we didn't put him under any pressure, and we made a mess of the 9 points after the bye, didn't we? In the last two derby games, you could argue that we should have seen them away. We should have won the away game, and we should have won that game there as well, shouldn't we? So if those had happened, I know it's ifs and buts, but that's a turnaround of 15 points. Now we didn't deserve that, and Rangers deserved it without a doubt. So, but if we put him under some pressure, we managed to see if he would have cracked. So you can't underestimate the value of that first team managerial experience, regardless of what team you've managed. Because you learn from your mistakes, don't you? That first couple of years can be unforgiving, and to come to a club like Celtic, in that fishbowl environment where the fans demand success and immediate success, and things go wrong, it implodes. I would much prefer us not to go with a rookie manager, and that's what he would be. I look at Arteta at Arsenal, a fantastic player. Obviously worked very, very closely with one of the best managers in the world, if not the best manager in the world. So you would think he would be set up for success, going to a massive club, a club that's prepared to spend a lot of money as well, and it hasn't really worked. I know they've won a trophy, but they're far too far down the league. They should be much further up, and I think he's been lucky to hold on to his job a few times. You could argue that Lampard got sacked. and Arteta wasn't doing much better. So I think it's a big risk, and we talked a lot about the Premiership today unintentionally, but it's good just to look at, what do they do and how do they do it, and what type of managers do they appoint? Do they take those sort of risks? But they've got Solskjaer, Arteta and Parker. Other than that, it's all vastly experienced people. And they probably make a decision on folk like Allardyce and people like that, that have been around the block so often that they've almost been around too long. But when you look at those clubs, the clubs who have big money, and the decisions that they make, they tend to focus on experience rather than going for that inexperience. And whilst you don't have the money to attract your Ancelotti and your Klopps and people like that, of course we don't, right? But just applying that principle and try to bring somebody in who has the experience, who is prepared to look at Celtic as an option. And I think that's what Eddie Howe is, as opposed to somebody who's managed under 23s. It's a different type of management, isn't it? Looking after the youngsters as opposed to your Scott Browns and your French internationalists, etc. That's been a big issue for us this year. There's not been a rapport between the manager, and the manager's not been able to apply some management skills to get the best out of the team, and that's what we need the next person to do, and that's what I believe Eddie Howe would do. So I don't think we should be getting somebody their first senior managerial role. I don't think that's the answer.
Stacy, there's obviously been a lot of talk about Maresca. Do you agree with Martin that it would maybe be too much of a risk given his inexperience?
I'm kind of torn on it because on one hand I actually agree with Martin because we don't know what type would they be able to handle pressure going from under 23s to a big club like Celtic, who are obviously challenging for trophies every year, and then obviously European football. So it is a big stepping stone. But at the same time, if he's given the right, obviously he's got his coaching badges and stuff like that, but we don't know what kind of person he is on the training ground. We've not actually seen him play, obviously, or manage in like a live match or anything like that. So you don't know what he's like. It could be really good because he's obviously worked with like Phil Foden, etc. and stuff like that. Obviously prior to being in the first team, so he's obviously got good caliber of players that he's worked with. So it could be a good option, but like I can agree with Martin. I don't think it's the right approach, in my opinion. I think there's more experienced managers out there that could obviously manage Celtic, but doesn't mean to say he wouldn't do a good job. I just don't think he's got enough experience to take us forward because we need to start rebuild. Obviously, it's going to be a major. I know we keep saying it, but it's a major rebuild, and I just think going with a more experienced option, a high caliber manager, is the way to go. But we don't know what he's like. That's the only problem. But to me, I just don't think he's the right appointment.
Yeah, I think experience is obviously the big question mark with Maresca. There's no doubt there's links there between Celtic and Man City. I think, as you touched on earlier, Stacey, we've been getting loan players from them for more than a decade now, back to John Guidetti and Patrick Roberts, Jason Denayer. You could go on and on. We know there's a relationship there. Pierre Lobel's son, I think, works there. Fergal Harkin is obviously Irish. I think he played briefly under Martin O'Neill at Leicester, actually, Fergal Harkin. So I think if he is going to come, Enzo Maresca, it seems almost straightforward that to get two people from the Man City setup seems like a very distinctive way forward. And he's a young coach. We don't know enough about him. But if he's working at Man City, they must rate him highly. But I agree that the question mark is just in terms of experience, because we don't know what his managerial style is like, and he's never been tested at that sort of first team level. I do think, though, he's less of a risk than Roy Keane, put it that way. That will do us for today. Thank you for joining us and for all your questions and your comments in the live chat box. Like this video, comment with your own thoughts below. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you shortly for more content. Cheers.